They came to witness one of nature's most powerful sights, some for adventure, others for the perfect view. But at Niagara Falls, beauty and danger share the same edge. In these 6 tragedies, one misstep or moment's decision was all it took. These are the final moments of people who never left the falls alive. It was August 15th, 2017, along the lower Niagara River, where the early sun was starting to break through a light haze over the water. The sound from Horseshoe Falls carried downstream, blending with the steady hum of cicadas. 42-year-old Daniel Johnson was on the river in his small aluminum boat. Daniel lived in Rochester, New York, and was known in his neighborhood as someone who collected and sold scrap. He had a knack for finding unusual things, old tools, rusted signs, even a set of antique oars, things that he would clean up and resell at flea markets. A week earlier, another collector told him about an old wooden barrel lodged between rocks just downstream from the base of the falls. Some thought it might be from a failed stunt years ago. To Daniel, it was worth a trip. By mid-morning, he launched his boat from a small public ramp and began heading upriver toward the spot. The water near shore was calm, but the further he went, the more the current tugged at the hull. He wore jeans, work boots, and a baseball cap. There was no life jacket in sight. 2 hikers walking along the trail by the river saw his boat. They stopped to watch as Daniel moved toward a group of rocks partly covered by mist. A wooden barrel was stuck between them, dark and worn from years in the water. Daniel turned off the engine and drifted closer. He pulled a length of rope from the floor and began looping it around one of the barrel's metal bands. The hikers later said they could hear him talking to himself, working out how to free it. He braced his feet against the side of the boat and pulled. The barrel didn't move. He tried again, leaning his weight into the rope. On the 3rd pull, the barrel suddenly came loose. The rope, still wrapped around his hands, snapped tight against the boat's side. The force swung the barrel toward him. It struck his knee, knocking him backward. His boots slipped against the wet aluminum floor, and before he could grab the edge, he went overboard. The current quickly pulled him away from the boat. One of the hikers called out, telling him to swim sideways toward the rocks, but he didn't seem to hear. His head came above the surface twice, his arms moving in short, uneven strokes. Each time, the water pushed him closer to the swirling base of the falls. Within moments, the mist covered him completely. The hikers ran along the trail trying to follow him, but there was nothing left to see, only the churning white water. One of them used a cell phone to call 911 and gave rescuers his last known location. A rescue boat launched from the Canadian side, but couldn't get close enough due to the strength of the current. Crews continued scanning the area for the rest of the morning. By early afternoon, they found Daniel's body several hundred yards downstream. News of the accident spread quickly among the small community of collectors and resellers who knew him. Friends described him as someone who always had a project going and never missed an opportunity to find something worth saving. Daniel's funeral was held a week later in Rochester. It was a modest service, with family, friends, and a few fellow collectors in attendance. The barrel was never recovered. It had drifted away during the rescue efforts and was likely carried further downriver. In the weeks after, local authorities reviewed boating safety in the lower Niagara. They announced new rules restricting private boats from approaching certain areas without a permit. Park rangers also increased shoreline patrols, especially in spots where strong currents posed hidden dangers. It was February 21st, 2015 at Niagara Falls, where winter had locked the river in ice. The air was cold enough to sting exposed skin, and the mist from the falls froze on railings, trees, and walkways. Below the American Falls, the water had slowed and frozen into a thick white sheet that stretched across the lower Niagara River. Locals called it an ice bridge, a rare formation that could last for days or even weeks in the right weather. That morning, among the visitors drawn to the frozen scene was 54-year-old Harold Greenbelt, who lived just a short drive away in Ontario. A retired truck driver, he often spent his days walking along the river with his camera. Harold photographed the falls in every season, but winter was the one he returned to most. The danger of walking on ice over moving water was something he knew well. Yet he also knew many had crossed ice bridges before, without incident. That morning, Harold parked near the observation area and made his way down toward the riverbank. He carried his camera in one hand and wore a heavy coat, gloves, and thick rubber boots. Park staff had posted warning signs telling people to stay off the ice, but the edge of the frozen sheet was already marked with footprints from others who had ignored them. From the observation deck above, a couple visiting from New York saw Harold step carefully onto the ice. He stopped for a moment, glanced around, then walked toward the center of the river. The ice was uneven, with spots of snow and smooth, clear ice. In places, frozen mist had built ridges several inches high. Harold moved slowly, setting each foot down before putting his weight on it. His breath showed in the cold air, and his boots crunched on the ice. About 30 yards from shore, he stopped to take pictures of the falls. The rushing water sounded faint under the thick ice, but its vibration still came through. Then a sharp cracking sound broke the cold air. The couple on the deck turned to look at Harold. He stopped and turned his head toward the noise. Another crack came, deeper this time, and the ice under him shifted. Before he could step back toward shore, the sheet broke with a loud pop. Harold let go of his camera as the ice shifted under him. The couple called out, but the sound of the rushing water was louder. He slipped sideways into the gap, striking the edge before going into the dark water. His head came up once through the broken ice, then the current pulled him under again. The visitors ran along the deck toward a nearby park worker and pointed out the spot where he'd fallen in. The worker radioed for help while keeping his eyes on the opening, but Harold didn't resurface. The current under the ice was strong, moving several miles per hour toward the lower rapids. Within minutes, rescue crews from both the U.S. and Canadian sides arrived, but thick ice made it impossible to get boats close to the area. A helicopter hovered above, scanning for signs of movement, while crews worked from the shore. The search was called off after dark when temperatures dropped further and visibility worsened. 2 days later, conditions improved enough for divers to enter the river. They found Harold's body downstream, caught between ice chunks and rocks along the shoreline. The recovery was slow due to the cold and the shifting ice, but by afternoon, his remains were brought back to shore. His funeral was held quietly in Ontario with family and a few close friends. Some neighbors remembered seeing him walking with his camera just days earlier. In the weeks after the accident, local authorities increased winter patrols along the river and began blocking certain access points when ice bridges formed, hoping to keep others from taking the same risk. It was August 4th, 2018 at Niagara Falls, and the warm summer weather brought long lines of visitors. The sky was mostly clear with a few clouds over the gorge. At the dock, passengers boarded the Maid of the Mist, a tour boat that takes people close to the base of Horseshoe Falls. Among them was 39-year-old Emily Dierek, an elementary school teacher from Pennsylvania, visiting with her husband and teenage son. They had spent the morning walking along the observation areas before deciding to take the boat tour in the afternoon. The deck was crowded, and most passengers wore the bright blue rain ponchos given out before boarding. The sound of the falls grew louder as the crew untied the lines and the boat began moving upriver. As the Maid of the Mist moved toward the mist-covered area near the base of Horseshoe Falls, the air became cooler and damp. Spray from the falls reached the passengers in bursts, soaking the decks. The engines pushed against the strong current, and the boat shifted slightly in the choppy water. Emily stood on the right side of the lower deck, holding the railing with one hand as the boat swayed. She leaned slightly to look past the people in front of her, trying to get a clear view of the falls. The deck was slick from constant spray, and water had pooled in shallow puddles near the rail. Witnesses later said that as the boat drew closer, a wave struck the side hard enough to make several passengers stumble. Emily's grip slipped on the wet railing as her foot slid on the soaked deck. She lost her balance and fell forward, her rain poncho catching briefly on the railing before she went over the side. Her husband shouted her name as crew members rushed toward the spot. Several passengers saw her head break the surface about 15 feet from the boat. She tried to lift her head above the waves, but the strong current quickly carried her toward the turbulent water near the base of the falls. Crew members threw life rings, but the pull of the water made them useless. Within seconds, she disappeared into the mist and foam. The captain kept the boat in position while the crew radioed for immediate assistance. Search and rescue teams from both the US and Canadian sides responded. Smaller rescue boats launched downstream, where the current might carry her. The tour boat stayed in the area for a few minutes before heading back to the dock, so passengers could be interviewed by authorities. Search teams continued scanning the river for the rest of the afternoon. By evening, visibility near the base of the falls was too poor for divers to enter safely. The search resumed the next morning when the mist was lighter, and her body was recovered several hundred yards downstream. Passengers from the tour described the shock of seeing someone go overboard in such a dangerous location. A week later, a funeral service was held in Pennsylvania. Friends, neighbors, and former students attended to pay their respects. Her husband and son were present, but did not speak publicly. In the months after the incident, the boat operators reviewed safety measures on board. The railing height on parts of the lower deck was increased, and additional crew members were assigned to monitor passengers during the closest approach to the falls. A warning about leaning over the rail was also added to the pre-boarding safety briefing. It was May 20th, 2017. At the Rainbow Bridge, the pedestrian and vehicle crossing that connects Niagara Falls, New York, to Niagara Falls, Ontario. The night air was cool, and the lights from both cities reflected off the dark water below. Cars moved steadily across the bridge, while the walkway for pedestrians had only a few people spread out along its length. One of them was 32-year-old David Cruz, a warehouse worker from Buffalo. Friends knew him for sometimes making impulsive choices after drinking. That afternoon, he had been at a friend's backyard barbecue with plenty of food and alcohol. By late evening, after several beers, he decided to cross into Canada to visit a late-night bar before heading home. Just before midnight, David walked onto the pedestrian side of the bridge. The walkway had tall metal railings with gaps between the vertical bars wide enough to see the river below. The sound of traffic moved steadily beside him, mixing with the constant noise of water flowing through the gorge. Partway across, David leaned over the railing to get a better look at the river. Another pedestrian, a man in his 40s heading toward the US side, walked past and exchanged a few words with him. According to the man, David was speaking loudly and gesturing toward the water, making comments about how high the bridge was. A few moments later, witnesses reported seeing David put one foot on the bottom rail, then climb onto the narrow outer ledge. The other pedestrian stopped and told him to get down, warning him it was dangerous. David waved him off and looked out over the gorge. When David turned to step back toward the walkway, his foot slipped on the narrow beam. The surface was smooth metal, with only a small lip for balance. He lost his footing, pitched forward, and fell over the edge. Witnesses said his arms flailed as he dropped toward the water, but the distance over 200 feet from the deck to the river has left no time to recover. The impact sent up a splash visible even from the walkway. Almost immediately, the current caught him, pulling him downstream toward the lower rapids. Searchlights from both the US and Canadian sides began scanning the river within minutes. Officers on both ends of the bridge radioed for marine units, but the combination of darkness, swift current, and turbulence made locating him nearly impossible. Within moments of the fall, he was no longer visible from the surface. Rescue boats launched from docks farther downstream to search areas where the current might carry him. Teams patrolled both shorelines, while the bridge walkway remained open but under watch from security. The initial search lasted until early morning, but was suspended when low fog rolled in and visibility dropped. For the next 2 days, recovery crews monitored the river. On May 23rd, his body was found along the riverbank about a mile downstream from the bridge. The coroner confirmed the cause of death as drowning and blunt force injuries from the fall. A small funeral service was held in Buffalo later that week. Family, close friends, and a few co-workers attended. Neighbors described him as someone who worked hard and liked to spend time with friends on weekends. In the months following the incident, Border authorities reviewed safety measures for the pedestrian walkway. Nighttime foot patrols were increased, and additional security cameras were installed along the length of the bridge. New signage warning about the dangers of climbing over the railings was also put in place, aiming to discourage risky behavior from both tourists and locals. It was September 10, 2016, at the Whirlpool Rapids in the lower Niagara River, about 2.5 miles downstream from Horseshoe Falls. The day was warm, and the water level was average for late summer. From the overlook platforms along the trail, the powerful rapids were clearly visible, with whitecaps breaking over swirling currents and large standing waves. Among the people near the river that day was 45-year-old Mark Justin, an avid kayaker from Michigan. He had driven to Niagara Falls for a weekend trip, bringing his own gear, a high-performance kayak, and a bright yellow helmet. Mark had years of experience in whitewater kayaking and had handled challenging rivers before, but he had never paddled the Niagara. That morning, park staff had been warning visitors about the strength of the Whirlpool Rapids. The current there can reach speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, and the waves can rise higher than 15 feet. Despite the posted signs and advice to avoid entering from unauthorized spots, Mark carried his kayak down to a section of shoreline upriver from the rapids. He planned to enter the river there, paddle down for a short distance, and exit before the most dangerous section. A group of hikers on the trail spotted him pushing off from shore. At first, the water was calmer, and he made steady progress downstream. From the overlook, his kayak appeared small compared to the wide river. The sound of rushing water grew louder as he approached the rapids. As he entered the faster-moving section, the kayak tilted sharply to one side, almost tipping over. Mark used his paddle to try to correct his balance, but the strong, uneven current made it difficult. Witnesses later said a large surge of water hit the side of the kayak, spinning it sideways. The kayak flipped, throwing him into the churning water. His helmet appeared briefly above the surface, the bright yellow visible against the dark water. A wave quickly rolled over him, and he disappeared from view. Several hikers called 911 reporting a kayaker in trouble. From the overlook, they could see the kayak resurface without him, spinning in the current before being carried downstream. Rescue boats were launched, but crews could not safely enter the Whirlpool Rapids. The currents there are too strong, and the swirling water can trap boats and debris. Instead, they positioned themselves farther downstream, where the water begins to settle. For the next several hours, emergency responders monitored the river, searching for any sign of him. By late afternoon, the current carried his body several miles downriver, where it was recovered by rescue crews. News of the accident reached kayaking clubs in several states. Mark's funeral was held a week later in Michigan, attended by friends, family, and fellow kayakers. Members of his club spoke about his years of experience and the trips they had taken together. In the months following, local authorities reviewed safety measures for the area. More visible warning signs were installed along trails leading to the river, clearly marking dangerous entry points. Fencing was also added to block access to the unauthorized launch spot where Mark had entered the water. Rangers increased patrols during the warmer months to watch for boaters or swimmers in restricted areas. The Whirlpool Rapids remain one of the most dangerous sections of the Niagara River. Even experienced paddlers are advised to stay clear of the area unless they are part of authorized and properly equipped guided runs, something Mark, despite his skill, did not have that day. It was November 14, 2015, at Prospect Point, in Niagara Falls State Park, New York. The night was cool, and a light breeze carried mist from the falls into the viewing area. Bright lights shone on the water in changing colors, and the damp air made the metal railings slippery. The concrete paths were still wet from earlier rain, with small puddles in low spots. Only a few visitors were around, either walking the paths or stopping by the overlooks. One of them was 29-year-old Jane Morgan, a freelance photographer from Toronto. She had driven to Niagara Falls for the weekend to work on a personal project, capturing long exposure photographs of the illuminated falls at night. She carried her camera equipment in a backpack and brought a sturdy aluminum tripod for stability. A little after 10 p.m., Jane chose a spot near the railing at Prospect Point, close enough to have a clear view of the Horseshoe Falls, but still inside the viewing area. She extended her tripod legs and mounted her camera, adjusting the angle to capture the mist rising from the base. The sound of the falls was steady and constant, filling the otherwise quiet space. A security guard doing his regular rounds walked past, noticing her crouched next to the tripod, turning the focus ring on her lens. He continued on but kept her in his peripheral view as he made his way along the edge of the viewing area. After taking several shots, Jane decided to move slightly back for a wider view. She stepped backward, still looking through her camera. Her right boot heel slid on the wet concrete, causing her to lose some of her balance. She reached behind her with one hand, gripping the top of the railing to steady herself. Her camera strap, still around her neck, was looped close to one of the tripod's legs. As she moved, the strap caught on the tripod and pulled it toward her. The unexpected pull shifted her weight further back, loosening her hold on the railing. In a quick movement, she tipped back against the metal and went over. From that point, the drop to the rocks below was more than 60 feet. She struck the rocks before the river's current drew her toward the base of the falls. The security guard immediately used his radio to call for help, reporting the exact spot where she had fallen. A couple standing farther down the walkway later told authorities they heard the sound of the tripod hitting the concrete. Looking toward the noise, they briefly saw a figure in the mist before it disappeared. Rescue teams from the U.S. Coast Guard and local fire departments arrived within minutes. Searchlights swept across the water at the base of the falls, but the mist reduced visibility to only a short distance. The slippery, uneven rocks made it too dangerous for crews to get close to the exact area that night. The search resumed at first light. With better visibility, crews scanned the river downstream where the current slowed. Around 8 a.m., her body was found along the shoreline in a calmer section. The coroner determined the cause of death to be a combination of injuries from the fall and drowning. Jane's funeral took place in Toronto the following week. Friends, family, and members of the photography community attended. Several spoke about past trips they had taken together to photograph landscapes, city streets, and night scenes. In the months after the accident, park officials reviewed safety measures for high-risk viewing areas. At Prospect Point, they installed non-slip surfacing in places near the railing, added more lighting for night visitors, and posted additional signs warning about slippery conditions when the ground is wet. Thanks for watching. But remember, every risk has its price. The next story is already waiting on the end screen. Click it if you're ready to witness another final moment.